People solve the hardest problem. And once you solve the hardest problem, typically you get the highest amount of returns, right?
So far, I think India has been leveraged more from a service perspective, and of course, for some of the work which Indian engineers do for multinational corporations. But how can we look at building products for India from India?
Have a tech-first, product-first approach to build a supply chain which can service our own domestic requirements. But in due course of time, we can become massive export hubs also.
Which are those sectors within the industry where we should apply our resources into, which is time, effort, and money? The air conditioner, for many reasons, was ticking many boxes.
Semiconductor is the heart of electronics. So everything else is kind of if you look at the car, but without the engine, the car doesn't move.
And the journey of last 8 to 10 years in particular is transitioning to become a healthy mix of a EMS, a ODM at least.
And being a startup, even if you're able to build the product, selling becomes very tricky because you don't have the scale, you are not able to offer it at that price point.
And we celebrated the first shipment of 5,000 units, which was sailing into the ocean, and then the next 5,000 units. As the shipment started to arrive into Russia, upon the initial inspection, it was noticed that there were hairline cracks in 100% of the televisions.
So when we started to sell, they wanted the technology and the quality and all the greatest things of Nortel and Cisco, and they wanted the price point of Huawei. And to make that happen, you needed to be a magician. Because there's no way on earth. As a startup, neither you have the resources of, the government of China backing Huawei with hundreds of billions of dollars, nor the, $100 billion of R&D over 50 years that these companies have done.
So what is exciting to us as investors is this potentially $150, $120 billion can become $450 billion in the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years.
What kind of support and guidance are we there to provide? The role of investors should not be limited to making investment. They should bring in global practices. Even if it comes at a certain cost in the initial instance, I'm very confident the total cost of ownership of any such system or platform or practice will be much more lower than not implementing those systems.
In this podcast, we'll be talking about India's electronics industry, which is at a frontier of innovation and growth. My name is Nishchal. I'm a principal with the firm and focus on driving investments in emerging tech sectors. If you name any category across different vertical, be it smartphones or consumer electronics or laptops, you will mainly hear the global brands like Apple or Samsung in smartphones, Dell, Lenovo, HP for laptops, LG, Samsung for consumer electronics. So you will realize that there are hardly any Indian OEMs or Indian brands per se. There's only the AC category or the white goods category have been able to build some OEM brands like Voltas or Blue Star. But barring that, Indian industry more or less has been reliant on the global OEMs. And the problem with that has been that if we try to segment the overall value chain, we will realize that out of 100 rupees a customer pays for the product, 50 to 60 rupees goes to the final OEM, which is, in case of smartphones, it would be Apple. So Apple will take the 60 rupees, and the EMS player, where a lot of Indian players would be working, they would make only the 5% of the overall value add. And if we try to segment the profit pool, the OEM itself, the Apple, will make 75% of the profit pool, while the EMS company will make only 2% of the profit pool. So that's where the disparity lies, and that's where it is imperative for us to make India product nation so that we are able to capture a large part of this value chain, because EMS itself does not capture a meaningful share.
Hi, welcome everyone. We welcome you to Singularity One. At Singularity One, our intent is to get the most relevant influencers in large categories, which can become very large profit pools for India as a country. You all would know that we are very committed to the thesis of strategic autonomy. Guests in today's podcast are great influencers for us for that category. At Singularity One, our intent would be to get operators and investors who are building or have built large platforms in categories which can become very, very large profit pools for India as a country. It may be electronics, it may be semiconductors, it may be defense, energy transition, and these become like 1 lakh crore profit pools in times to come. I'm joined by my colleague Nishal, and we have two guests.
Mr. Manish Sharma, one of the most respected leaders in India's electronics industry. He became the youngest MD in Panasonic India at the age of 40, and this was unheard of that time for any Japanese companies in India. He was one of the first guy to gain that position. And he's currently the chairman of Panasonic in India at Southeast Asia. Under his leadership, Panasonic expanded from being just a consumer electronics brand to becoming a diversified technology and solutions company in India. He has served as chair of the Electronics Manufacturing Committee of FICCI. He is a strong advocate for Make in India, PLI-led manufacturing, and building high-value domestic capability. Our second guest today is Mr. Sanjay Nayak. He is the visionary founder and ex-CEO of Tejas Networks, one of the few deep tech companies in India and leading telecom equipment companies. Over 20 plus years, he turned Tejas from a startup into a globally respected telecom products company, exporting to more than 75 countries. He has been one of the strongest advocates for India for deep R&D, hardware innovation, and value-added manufacturing. Today, I think his presence with us should be a masterclass for all the deep tech founders in how India can build globally competitive technology products. Along with them, I'm joined by Yash, who is the founder and CIO at Singularity, and will also be a co-host with me today. He will be bringing the investor's perspective and Singularity lens to the discussion.
So I think why we were most excited, Manish and Sanjay, was Manish, I think in Panasonic you have built an Indian outfit of a large global operation. You have been on the executive committee. Panasonic has seen wonderful cycles globally. Sanjay, as I call you fondly, founded a product-first company, Tejas, I think through cycles, coming from a small city in Raipur. So while everyone knows the success of it, I think what it would be lovely to bring across in this is what were those near-death moments, and maybe if you can give 1-2 examples in your respective journeys.
To begin with, I'll give you one instance. I was younger then, very ambitious. As I said, the initial part of my professional career was defined by my ambition and aspiration. We used to work for Samsung. I was in the other side of the table doing R&D, and that was the time when analog to digital transition was happening, and a lot of multinational companies were setting their footprint in the country, were very ambitious to become part of the hub and spoke model as it existed during those days. And so was the case with professionals like us also. We were like trying to break the boundaries, and I was making a pitch such that the Indian subsidiary should also look at exporting to other countries. And cutting the long story short, after a relentless effort of about a year, we were able to bring in export order from the subsidiary of Samsung in Russia. And we tried to do all what we can, but I think we failed on one fundamental assumption, which was the design consideration for the plastic which was being used for the televisions which were exported to Russia. And we celebrated the first shipment of 5,000 units, which was sailing into the ocean, and then the next 5,000 units which was sailing in the ocean. And as the shipment started to arrive into Russia, upon the initial inspection, it was noticed that there were hairline cracks in 100% of the televisions. And I think the big learning which happened in the initial instance was we completely disowned it, and we passed on the buck to the production that this would be a production error in terms of a torque or something which was applied on the screw. But eventually we found that it was fundamentally a design consideration error, that in the sub-zero temperatures which oceans were witnessing during that part of the year, these ships sailing into Russia, the tension was such that these plastics cracked. And, it was almost near death experience, because you have exported 25,000 televisions, and one after the other, one ship is carrying a lot of 5,000 units. But we had our own set of learnings, because then we completely shifted our approach to knowing what the customer needs, what are the conditions in the area, in the zone where the consumption eventually will happen, and not only specific to the point where you sell the products, but throughout the life cycle. So I think a significant learning which happened out of this very terrible failure which happened at the early part of my career was to go much more deeper, much more objective in understanding the scope, understanding the specifications, talking a lot, communicating a lot where the consumption eventually is going to happen, and shift our mindset out of those laboratories where those products were actually customized or designed for a particular customer.
Sanjay for Tejas, as a founder, promoter, I think till 2017-18 maybe surviving. And there's this one instance we were discussing that in around COVID or just at the onset of COVID, the cash in the company was more than the market cap of the business.
Yeah.
So you have seen a lot of cycles. I think a few that you would recollect, which were near-death moments for you.
Certainly. In fact, so we started Tejas in the year 2000. And actually, the start of Tejas itself, to me, was a very contrarian thought process, because we started as a pure play, deep tech product company, venture funded in year 2000, when everything that I said didn't happen. So there wasn't really venture funding available in decent quantities. Deep tech and product ecosystem didn't exist then. It's still, upcoming in India now. Number 3 was that we really were first-time entrepreneurs. So we've not raised money, we've not got a track record. And then we are building telecommunication equipment which required 99.9999% reliability, which means if you run an equipment for 10 years continuously, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 15 minutes per year is what you get on an average for any downtime to build equipment of that reliability. So starting with that as a challenge or a charter was a non-starter. But for whatever it's worth, we said that we have enough talent in the country, and why can't we build a world-class company? Because before that, I used to be managing director of Synopsys and Cadence, and I said we could do world-class products, complex products for global guys from India, so why not do it for ourselves? So that to me was the beginning of the thing. So during the journey, we saw the entire VC ecosystem evolve. So we actually raised more than $100 million of venture capital over 5 rounds of funding from 2000 till 2017 from all the top-tier global guys. Our revenue, by the way, as a product company, we started in 2000. It takes 2-3 years to build product, but our revenue ramp up from first 7 years was from 0 to 5 crores to 10 crores to 28 to 45, 128, 230, 300, 700. This was the first 7 years. And we were all ready to go IPO in 2007, 2008, almost about to file DRHP. And then we had the global financial crisis. And before that, we had done something very unique. Nortel Networks, which was the world's #1 company by far in telecommunication equipment. I think in the early 2000s, 30% of the market cap of Canadian Stock Exchange was Nortel alone. And Nortel was kind of the platinum standard of telecom. And we had built products which were that good that we used to OEM to Nortel. So we used to design, manufacture in India, stick a Nortel label, and they used to sell it to 70 countries. But that was about 50% of our business international through Nortel. And then post-2007 crisis, when the IPO came to a pause, around 2009, Nortel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So suddenly on one day, your 50% revenue come down, okay? And because we are planning to go IPO, we had not raised money, so we were also, a little bit tight on cash. But that wasn't enough. 2009, we had the famous 2G scam in India. So for the next 2-3 years, the entire capex in India froze. For the remaining 50% of the business, there weren't customers who were buying. So internationally, we were bet on Nortel. India, our home base, customers didn't buy. So around 2011 or so, then we started to run thin on cash and all that. And then as a product company, you have to invest a lot in R&D, we still, I think Tejas is still among the topmost R&D spenders as a percentage of revenues. Because unless you spend in R&D, how do you innovate? And unless you innovate, how will anybody buy your product, even one equipment against a Nortel or a Cisco or a Huawei? So you have to be that good. And when you've been investing and suddenly you're running out of cash, what do you do? So the big event was in 2011 saying that now our revenues were down to 200 crores from 700 crores 4 years back. Now what do you do? For whatever cash we had, I think that year we spent about 80 crores in R&D out of 200 crores of revenues. So that took really guts, because we did that because unless we invented in the next generation of products, which we anticipated were going to be the what now is smartphone, but what makes the smartphones do all the backhaul, all the equipment for transmission, we invested in that technology, which is the backbone technology for packet and data and all that. And that's how we got going. But in 2011, and coming back to the near-death experience, we had a factory in Pondicherry. Actually, Pondicherry that time used to have this, excise and all the other benefits. And around that time, there was a major cyclone in Pondicherry, and the entire factory was under 15 feet of water. So whatever inventory we had was also underwater. Then in 2012 in Bangalore, wherever we had our office, we had a fire in our building, So it was fire, flood, financial crisis and everything else. So the low point, I think, was around 2012 or 13. Revenues are down, money is almost out. And we started to rebuild because we invested in R&D, and then we came back up, and by 2017, actually, things started to look quite good. Then we did the IPO, and then things started to roll back up. But I would say what it taught us during all these years is two things, and partly what I agree with what Manish was saying, that see the purpose with which the company starts. And our purpose is very simple, that it's about time that India had a world-class deep tech product company that we can be proud of. And that never changed. So I think as a result of that, the core team, if I were to look at the employee number 0 to 200, which were probably who joined in 2000, 2001, even when I left the company in 2023, about 80 out of the first 200 employees were still in the company. And those are all mostly R&D engineers, sales and all that. So what I'm trying to say is that the purpose with which you start is very, very crucial. Number two, I think as management, as founders, the kind of value system that you bring in the company, the kind of, personal leadership style and commitment that you show is what people observe. So I think near-death experiences are a way of life for any generational company or people who are going to build anything in the long term. What comes out of it is that how strong the founders are, how strong is their conviction, and secondly, what is the vision for which you're fighting for? And I think if those are good, there'll always be a way one can find out. And that's really what I learned from my journey in Tejas.
So both of you have motivated us on this path of strategic autonomy, and just for the benefit of people who are viewing this, the essence of strategic autonomy as how we look at it or how we have been inspired to look at it is where there's massive demand pools in India. We have huge import dependency or dependency on supply chains globally, where we have a right to win, that we can have a tech-first, product-first approach to build a supply chain which can service our own domestic requirements. But in due course of time, we can become massive export hubs also. And there's this famous, thesis of how South Korea and Thailand evolved as geographies, and how one was a product economy and one was more a services economy, and the kind of outcomes one achieved. I think both of you, I think one example of many, Manish, that I know of you is the air conditioner ecosystem and how you were influential as localizing this, and such a way how outside, I think, post payments and the UPI movement, I think there were 2-3 categories that were identified, and among them definitely defense and telecom equipment was one. Where the view was that how can the government, and in particular segments like BSNL, etc., can be mobilized to become buyers. I think you had, by design, got Tata to come as a strategic partner and take majority of in the company. And then I think the view was that how can you start exporting also. So I think maybe your thought process, how you got Tata, and around that time, and how Tejas has evolved, I think maybe it will be good to get some perspectives.
In fact, the point that you mentioned about strategic autonomy, I just wanted to add one more thought process to that whole angle. If you really see where the world is going today, the geopolitics of the world, tech is really pretty much the drivers of economy, And if you look at, for example, the top 10 listed companies in the US by market cap, probably 9 out of 10, or at least 8 out of 10 for sure, are deep tech product companies which are there. In contrast, if you look at the top 25 listed companies in India by market cap, I don't think there's a single deep tech company. The second thing I wanted to say on the same context of strategic autonomy is that today a denial of technology is as bad as a disruption of supply chain. For example, we all run our daily lives on technology which is not invented or owned by India, and any sovereign nation can require you to suddenly shut us off from that, and that kind of havoc it can cause on airplanes or offices working and so on is very, very deep. So I really think it's very important that the aspect of strategic autonomy, which is not only financial, which, as I said, in terms of where the value capture is happening in the world, but also from the way our lives can be, is well understood. Now, the good part about India as a country is that we have a lot of talent. If you really see, when I talked about the 9 or 10 top listed companies in the US, a significant part of their technology development or R&D is actually done in India, in our own soil here. So there is no reason to believe that we can't do all these things in India. The question is, it's not happening for a different set of reasons, and it's about time that the wake-up call now that has come, that it starts to happen. So coming back to the example of Tejas and telecom and defense, if you really look at both defense and telecom actually are in a way tied up today. Because if your communication infrastructure is compromised, for example, you can't trust anything else because everything runs on communication today, right? And defense, the way the warfare has changed, especially post the Ukraine war and whatever is happening, it's a lot less about the physical infantry and how many people you have and how many tanks you have. It's more about how much technology you have, the kind of things that drones can do or unmanned vehicles can do, the kind of things AI-based detection and automation systems can do is insane. And needless to say, every country in the world, this is crown jewels. They would not be happy to give you anything out of either the communication infrastructure, jewel elements, or the defense to you. So there is no choice but for us to invent and develop them on our own. And this is really where the things are moving in the country. And I really believe that in the communication sector, since I understand that a little bit, with 5G and 6G coming, the 6G standards are coming out, I think India is in a very good shape. Similarly, with the advent of AI, there are three things which are needed. Of course, there's software, which is the models and all that. Then the compute infrastructure, and then there's the communication infrastructure, which ties up how do you connect all the data centers? And even within the data centers, how do you connect all the racks? So there's a huge amount of element of communication which comes in. Same thing in the case of defense. If you are able to intercept the enemy's conversation or jam things, what can happen. So I really think those are the things in which things are going in the right direction. And as a country, I think there's a big opportunity which is opening up because of this new situation which is happening.
In particular, coming to the Tata and Tejas and how that...
Tata and Tejas, I think the way I also wanted to say in the product ecosystem, there are, if you want to be among the top 5 in the world in any segment of the business, because really if you see in any of the deep tech sectors, typically the top 5 companies in the world will capture about 80% of the profit pool. And the remaining long tail will capture the 20. And I think as much as it is exciting to own the Indian market and grow here, which is absolutely needed because you have to have a first market where you grow, you have to really think of becoming a globally competitive player. Because in technology, nobody thinks of buying an Indian-only product. You want to buy the best mobile phone, you want to buy the best car, you want to buy the best, camera, NXYZ. And it is for the Indian company to come up to that level. So I'm very confident and comfortable that we have the R&D firepower in the country and now the manufacturing ecosystem that we can design whatever needs to be designed and we can manufacture whatever needs to be built. There's a third element which is missing and which is a country level problem. India as a brand is in the world is not known as a product country. We are known as a services country, right? You talk of IT services, you talk of any kind of services, India is right up there. How many products of any sector, of any kind, I'm not talking about technology. I don't think we have a garment brand which is world famous. We have a car brand which is world famous and so on and so forth. I think the branding is one thing which we lack. Second, if you have to be a top 5 in the world, you need a big balance sheet. In the case of telecommunication, all the competitors are companies between $10 to $50 billion in size. So if you have a company with a few $100 million of revenues and balance sheet of a small size, go and want to win a $500 million, $1 billion deal internationally, customers would not be comfortable because they want you to be around for next 10 years. So what Tata has brought to the table for us is it brought possibly the best brand that India has outside of India. And secondly, the balance sheet in the name of Tata. So I think that was a good partnership because Tejas could do whatever it could do on a certain level to get to some stage. But then along with Tata, I think the opportunities for globalization open up in a much bigger way. And so it was a good win-win situation because, Tatas were, looking at how can they participate in more strategic things in the country. And telecommunication definitely was one of them. And Tejas was right up there in terms of all the technology. So in a sense, the marriage was quite a good thing from both parties.
I'll come back to you how the playbook looks from here onwards. But Manishji, I think Panasonic is fairly sizable in India. But more so, I think the effort that you played to localize the air conditioner ecosystem, which is one of your many achievements. So I think if you can just run us through that journey, because it would not have been easy, we would have not been price competitive initially.
So I think, Yash, when we all went into lockdown, the big question, and quite in line with what you're trying to do with strategic autonomy, I think the big vision which came was how can we come together to drive the agenda of self-reliant India. And the call was Atmanirbhar Bharat. And therefore, we all across industry and government got into a huddle to discuss that which are those sectors within the industry where we should apply our resources into, which is time, effort, and money. And air conditioner, for many reasons, was ticking many boxes. The first one is the penetration of air conditioners in the country then was close to 5.5%, which essentially meant that the opportunity to let this category grow was immense. And a potential unlock was round the corner, with people starting to prefer better comfort and convenience within their residential spaces. The second is that the local value addition which was happening in the country then was only about 20-22%. And why not should we manufacture compressors and motors, heat exchangers, and all what goes into the bill of material of air conditioner? So that is the second thing. And third is the potential to create jobs. If there is an average of the number of units which are sold comparative to any other category, air conditioner far exceeds this number. Essentially because you don't only need people to manufacture air conditioners or to distribute and sell them, but you also need people to annually maintain the air conditioners throughout the life cycle of a product with the consumer. So the ability to generate jobs is very, very high in terms of per unit of air conditioners sold. So this was one strategic category we all focused our effort into. And then the big argument was that the PLI should come on the finished good because penetration still is low. Should we look at letting that get passed to the end consumer so that we make it more affordable? But there are other ways to do it. GST reductions will now fuel demand creation of air conditioners and hence will feed it back to the growth of manufacturing which has started to happen in the backdrop of PLIs when they came then. So I think one good decision which was agreed between the industry was that the PLI should be on the components, on the bill of material items. And therefore, when we look back, say it's been about 3.5 years, and I would like to believe that the air conditioners PLI is one of the most successful PLIs for a variety of reasons. I think the biggest one is that industry agreed for a common purpose. And we all decided that we'll look at aggregating the demand in this whole process because the disability then, comparative to say China, which used to exist for components, was exceeding 15%. Now, if you're having a disability of 15%, whatever the tariffs are, you still will be finding it more competitive to bring in from elsewhere. So that is why industry decided that they'll take a potential hit. We will aggregate the demand to generate economies of scale faster, and PLI will do the remaining part of the disability. And, we took the stock of the situation quite recently from 20-22% value addition. Then today the value addition stands 65% plus. Compressors in millions of numbers are starting to get manufactured in the country, and this number is growing quite rapidly. Largely almost everything which populates air conditioner is already manufactured in the country. So I think this is one good example of in a situation where disabilities may be very high, how can we look at building scale and building competitiveness in the country?
I think one deep dive that we wanted to do with both of you, Nishal and myself, is the segment that both of you are veterans of, which is electronics. I think the reason why we are very curious about electronics is because of the size of the industry. So I think just to give the viewers a sense, in 2013 when the electronics industry started, and I may be a bit wrong over here, but ballpark that was about $45 billion of, I think, of the market size that existed. So 10 years out, 2013 to 2023-24, that 45 billion has become $115 billion. Today, I think the value addition in electronics is roughly around 21%. So we have a value pool today that exists of about $24 billion or so. Now, there are various segments in this, as you would see in the explainer slides, that there are various demand drivers, I think, from mobile phones, electronic components, strategic electronics like industrial electronics, auto electronics. There is a segmentation. Some of these categories are growing faster. So what is exciting to us as investors is this potentially $150, $120 billion can become $450 billion in the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years. this value addition today, which exists, I think the profit pool, which is say roughly 18%, even if we maintain this, I think the local component can be approximately some $24-25 billion of profit pool, which means some 1,70,000-1,80,000 crores of profit pool that can exist in India. And this covers approximately 30-35% of the BOM. Approximately 65-70% of the BOM still goes in terms of design IP products. So I think, Sanjay bhai, first I have two questions for you. One is, in the thought process of strategic autonomy, RDI is a big pool of capital, which is 1 lakh crore to incentivize India to become a design first, IP first, product first nation. So if I take this $450 billion, even if I take 60% of it, that is north of $200 billion. How do we do a value capture of this? Right? I think that would be more worthwhile to solve for. And then I will come to my follow-up question on EMS.
Perfect. Now, first of all, you've articulated a very good set of data points that $150 billion industry is going to 450. And within that, there are two elements. What you rightly said is the domestic value add, which is the domestic content, which could be, systems, subsystems, the value of the EMS. And then the third point, which you articulated and brought out very nicely, is the profit pool. Because what happens is that out of $450 billion, the highest profit pool is captured by the product owner. So, for example, in Apple, captures 50% of the profit pool. If you're a Cisco, you capture 30% of the profit pool. If you're a, any other, Samsung, LG, or whosoever is the owner of the product, they capture the highest amount of profit pool. And that profit pool is really completely driven by R&D, innovation, sales, marketing, branding, and who controls the supply chain and distribution. So that to me is the top of the pyramid. In NVIDIA, for example, is a fabulous semiconductor company, which basically means it has 0 factories. Apple has 0 factories in the world, right? So, but they capture the maximum amount of profit. So coming back to your point, I think what India has done very well in the last 10 or 15 years of our electronics journey is we have done a good job of the other aspect of the profit pool other than the R&D, the innovation, which by the way is the largest chunk. So we have focused on the remaining 40-50% of the bill of material. So we have got the EMS ecosystem, which is doing phenomenal. Now with the new policy and components, I think the subsystems will also get done. But I think the design and ownership of that is still missing. Now, why is that missing and how will it get fixed is really the big question. So I think two questions, again, coming from an entrepreneur side. If you really see the way entrepreneurship works and people solve the hardest problem, and once you solve the hardest problem, typically you get the highest amount of returns, right? So if you see the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India in the last 25-30 years, at different points in time, the best talent did not try and solve the problem which was the hardest problem, but they solved the problem which was give the highest return for the time of investment, which is a natural thing to do. So if you really see the IT services industry, which was based on a simple concept of offshoring and doing something at a lower cost than what you could, really dominated the first generation of entrepreneurial success in India in terms of wealth creation and so on and so forth. So the best talent went there, a lot of business model came. The next wave was really e-commerce, digital economy, and so on and so forth. Third wave, I really think, going from now to the next 10-15 years, is entrepreneurs will be solving relatively harder problems, inventing new products, inventing new things, building systems, building things which control the as I said, the fountainhead of profit pool. And I think that is what is needed. Now, that requires three things. A, it requires talent, a lot of talent, because that kind of talent is not necessarily available, because in addition to R&D, you need product management, you need distribution, you need supply chain, and all that has to come together. So it's like a multidimensional talent team that you need to build. Second, you need a lot of capital. And a lot of it has to be patient capital, because it could take some time before you get your product developed. Then it has to be better than what's already out in the market, either in terms of feature set, price points, technology, performance, and so on and so forth. And that takes time. It's not easy to dislodge an incumbent who's been spending tens of billions of dollars of R&D for years and say that, out of the blue, I'm going to come and make something else. So that's the second thing. And third, which is most important, And that assuming you got funding, assuming a bright set of entrepreneurs have built the product, unless you sell and you sell a lot of it, you can't make money. And if you don't make money, how do you keep the machine moving? I think so really where the government and the ecosystem and the research and development innovation fund is going to come is they're going to feed the patient capital part. They're going to feed the technology development part, including acquisition of technologies from abroad, if that jumpstarts our ecosystem. So that one part of the problem will be solved. The other part of the problems, I think, also has to be solved in some way using government intervention to the extent possible, which is really creating a market pull. So if you really see how China, for example, has really become a global powerhouse in what I call established product categories, which are things for which products are already there. And, they have basically leveraged their own domestic market to create a large volume of demand, aggregated all of that. And the domestic companies could first sell in China, get to some scale, and then the Chinese government explicitly help them sell internationally in terms of low cost of financing, bilateral lines of credit, so on and so forth, right? So I think that kind of a playbook also has to come, because just building the products is not the end of it. The real story starts after you sell, after you start making money and so on. So I think those are really the elements which have to be plugged. The good news is India is a large market. There are certain sectors of the economy where, for good or bad reasons, as we discussed earlier, there is no choice but to become self-reliant, defense being one of them, telecom on a larger scale at some point in time. Then I see opportunities in new sunrise sectors like, say, medical electronics. If you really see, these are all regulation-driven sectors. All the current medical devices that we have are all older generation. They look big and clunky. Whereas if you take the latest generation of electronics and, all the other sensors, something which is, this big can probably be shrunk into a palm-sized thing. And then the software which is coming in driving the things completely differently. And the rate of innovation on these things is very slow by the incumbents. So an incumbent who is a global giant today in, say, medical devices doesn't have motivation to accelerate that, pace of innovation there, because he really wants to keep selling his old stuff for the next 10 years. And this is really where disruption is going to happen. And whenever there's a technology disruption, large market size, and enough, capital and, thing available, I think we suddenly have a perfect storm. And I think those are the kind of sectors that India will be getting ahead and going forward.
Manishji, I think we have been discussing on EMS as a category. This one may argue, but I think it is roughly maybe 6, 7, 8% of the revenue pool. Margin additions would be, or the profit pools would be lesser. If you look at today in India, I think the sum total profit pool of the EMS companies combined would be roughly, listed EMS companies combined would be closer to 12,000 crores. The collective market cap is 5.4 lakh crores. I think there is a view that if we become $450 billion in size, this profit pool will expand to 60,000 crores. And global EMS companies today, let's say, where the growth is still 8, 9, 10%, trade at 10 times, right? In India, one can argue growth is higher. So today it is trading at some 40, 45 times. Profit pool has to become 5x. And then also there's a 10% gain in terms of absolute market cap of these companies. So if you have to play EMS today, and if you have to bet on if there's such a large margin addition or such a large value pool that will be created, like $450 billion, Indian profit pool clearly being $25 billion out of that. And I'm sure that as these initiatives happen, that profit pool increases. So how would you play the EMS segment? What would be your advice?
Yash, if we take a step back and go, let's say, 3 decades from now, the very fundamental reason, and if you look at the construct of companies as they exist, you spoke about EMS, which is like electronic manufacturing services. So these are the companies which essentially convert bill of material into finished good for anybody else. So in that sense, you are entrusting responsibility to manufacture to somebody else. So it's very basic operating value addition which is done by EMS companies. Then the second set of companies are called OEMs, which are like original equipment manufacturers. These are the people who will design the product and may in some cases have their own manufacturing or may entrust it to somebody else. And then there are ODMs, which will like design the product and propose it to brands who would like to rebrand it and sell it in their own brand. So these are fundamentally three set of ecosystem platforms as they exist. There are a few more. Now, why EMS in particular grew strong in our country? I think the backdrop I've seen in last 30 years is that essentially they started to come into existence when in the VAT era, certain states started to offer VAT incentives to attract investments into their states. Subsequently, they became excise benefits into Uttaranchal, into Uttarakhand, into Himachal, and then some of the EMSs started to mushroom in those areas, and the mindset was limited to a short benefit, limited to that period, that how can you look at taking advantage of that incentive as it exists. And every state was wanting to generate employment, and why not, and no harm in doing that. But I think fundamentally we misunderstood that as a crutch which used to exist for that limited duration of time. And therefore many came into existence, many perished. Only the one which were able to build a healthy mix of being a EMS and also transitioning and building some capabilities to become a ODM, which means building design-led manufacturing capabilities into certain categories, and also diversifying into categories where they are not limited to being an assembler of a sort, are doing well in the country. And you know the top 2 or 3 EMSs in the country, if you put a lens and carefully analyze them, you will find that all of what they do is not limited to being a EMS. And the journey of last 8 to 10 years in particular is transitioning to become a healthy mix of a EMS, a ODM at least. And simultaneously, the ability to build more value addition within their capability, which means if you're assembling, say, a mobile phone, can you also look at building partnerships or capabilities or design capabilities within your umbrella to do, say, camera modules, or not only just populate the PCB boards, but also look at manufacturing some of those components in the country. And that is how this journey is taking shape. People who will be able to consistently build domestic value addition capabilities will be able to command the multiples of what you spoke. Otherwise, eventually there will be a time when they'll be very, very hard pressed of margins, and hence generation of value for the shareholders will become difficult.
Sure. Sanjay Bhaiya, I think one can argue that EMS companies today trades at 45 times. Market cap varies from 40,000 crores to maybe 1 lakh crore. And I think companies which are product first companies, examples, and I think one can take Tejas example, it has varied from 10 to 24,000 crore market cap. And you have been a flag bearer of product economy. How will the next 5, 6, 7 years of like a product first playbook like a Tejas and an EMS playbook look like? Like where will profit pools will be higher? Where will, I think, as investors, we will be better off investing?
So one thing which is common to both the industries, whether EMS or a product, is that the real benefits only start to come when you get to scale. So if you really see, even in the EMS industry, when we became a scale industry in India, thanks to some of the very attractive government policies and push to move out, by global guys to a domestic market like India for a variety of reasons. So I think scale gives us that size. So once you get the scale in any business, whether it's product or EMS, I think that's really when the investors start reaping the reward. Because unlike a services industry, the product industry is very difficult because you have to make a lot of upfront R&D investments. But once the product is done and it starts selling, and unless you sell a lot of it, the returns don't come commensurate. So I think the big challenge for the product ecosystem in the country is to get to scale. And that is really why, when I mentioned earlier that assume the products of world class will be built, whether it's a chip or a system, but can we sell enough of it starting from India and then for the world? Even if you look at some of the leading chip companies in the world, even look at, say, NVIDIA, for example, few years back, when they were selling in a certain segment with a certain kind of volumes, their value and market cap or everything was X. But suddenly when you start selling a lot more into a new space, I think things change. And it's not that the R&D teams were too different than what they were before or they're not investing. It was just the scale business that they got into. So I think coming back to your question, EMS, the good part is there's a lot of predictability because in a sense it's a services business. It's an electronic manufacturing service. So like the IT services, there will be a consistent growth over the year, non-linear growth at different points in time, at the, maturity level of the industry. And that gives a comfort and I would say sense of stability to the investors. The product industry will be more like a hockey stick, and it'll be a lot of time it'll take to get things going. And hopefully a lot of those companies will be unlisted in that, quote unquote, shaky period. But once they come out of, the woods and they get into a listed, publicly listed space, if they are able to scale up business, I think that should give a significantly larger reward. So I think it's just two different flavors of businesses. At a higher level, I clearly believe that India as an economy in the world, if you just go for the services economy, and there's a very, very well documented study that we will be stuck into what is called the middle income trap, which is what Thailand and Malaysia and many of these countries who have $10,000 to $12,000 per capita income, they get stuck into that. The companies who have broken out of the middle income trap are all innovation-driven economies. China being the latest one of them. Korea was the one earlier to that. Taiwan was earlier to that. So I think as a country, given our population, given all our aspirations, I think there's no choice but to have a healthy mix of both. So we have to have a good set of product companies from India who basically create this non-linear value creation. And there's got to be a lot of services across different segments of the economy to make that happen.
So let me ask the next question, sir. So you started Tejas back in 2000, and I think that around that time there was hardly any ecosystem for software for deep tech companies. Other in the last 20 years, 25 years, a lot of things have evolved. The VC ecosystem has evolved. Even relatively, we are in a much better shape compared to the deep tech ecosystem as well. That time, there was not even the right talent for it. Even if you will go to any large customer, there were a bunch of large competitors and companies that time, Alcatel, Nokia, Nortel, right? The typical challenge I have seen personally is that the when you go to a customers they want at their desired price point, right? And being a startup, even if you're able to build the product, selling becomes very tricky because you don't have the scale, you are not able to offer it at that price point. How did you solve it for you so that it probably can act as a guiding point?
Very good question, because this is the problem that what Yash said, as we have a lot of deep tech product companies coming out of India, this is absolutely the problem they're all going to face. That the customer from in the context of telecom, and I'll give you a very simple example. So when we started to sell, they wanted the technology and the quality and all the greatest things of Nortel and Cisco, and they wanted the price point of Huawei. And to make that happen, you needed to be a magician. Because there's no way on earth. As a startup, neither you have the resources of the government of China backing Huawei with hundreds of billions of dollars, nor the $100 billion of R&D over 50 years that these companies have done. So how do you even get going, right? And your product is good. So the answer really lies in being, you have to be an innovation-driven company. So that's number one. In the case of Tejas, for example, I can tell you that, and this is way back in 2000, we were innovating in a sense that we could, at that point in time in India, one could buy bandwidth only in units of 64 kbps, right? 64 kbps or 128 and so on and so forth. Or then if you went into, tens of megabits, you had to buy much more, which was 155 Mbps and so on. So we created a technology based on a new standard which came out, where you could buy bandwidth in any multiples from 0 to 1 gigabit, and you pay for that. And that was the time when the call centers and all the offshoring was happening, and someone wanted 50 Mbps, someone wanted 10, someone wanted 2 Mbps, and there was no operator who would give this. So with this equipment, which was based on the latest standard which came out, it was a very simple, simple means small looking box, but it was very useful for the customer. So even though that box was just a $2,000 box, and the customer was buying probably $200 million worth of equipment, that $2,000 box had a unique value proposition. So some differentiator you had to create to get the foot into the door, because in an established product category, as I call telecom was, there had to be some differentiation. Once you are in, it's much easier, because even having a Me Too plus product, which means it's kind of a product, but of course, if you build a newer technology, there'll be something better, software will be better, etc. You will have a better slack. So I think first and foremost is some amount of innovation has to come. The second thing which I feel is very important, and this is a playbook which I have seen now in many countries, government is the first buyer, okay? A lot of the role of the governments in the world has to propel innovation ecosystem. So for example, if US government did not buy stuff from SpaceX, do you think they could have survived? If Chinese government did not support Huawei, do you think they could have survived? So I think the world has changed, and it's perfectly okay for any sovereign, and of course India, that if there's an Indian product which is capable, may not be 100 out of 100 on day one, but it's 95 out of 100, but the team and the capabilities exist that within a very short period of time, it can become 100 or maybe 110. We have to give opportunities to such entrepreneurs. But if the government tender processing says that you have to meet these 500 lines of, compliant to all technical, then you have to also be in L1, I think it's a very hard game. So I think the good news is the procurement policies aligning with the vision for India to become a product nation are changing. And I think that is the second thing. And then the last part is, I really feel is that ecosystem partnership has to also develop to make the Indian products more competitive. Let me highlight a little bit on that. So for example, when you make the product on the day one, the finished product, it could be a car, it could be a telecom system, it could be a drone. It's not necessary that on day one, every single thing that goes inside that has to be Indian. The fact that you can put it all together, put a lot of software and then, create some new innovation is good enough to get started. But very quickly, we need to make sure that someone in the country is building some subsystem. So for example, in the case of drones, we should build some of the chips that go into there. And if someone builds a chip and that goes into all the drones that go into the country, it's a good business. Someone could be building, specialized kind of motors with, different capabilities or batteries or charging systems and so on and so forth. So I think that is kind of what is needed in the ecosystem. So part of when we are trying to build a strategic autonomy or a product nation script, I think we have to treat it like a jigsaw puzzle. So if you take, 5 or 10 sectors or products which are important for the country as a vertical, and you take 5 or 10 different things which are going to be horizontal, which are going to get used. And then we pick on a heat map which are the ones which are going to give us the highest impact and say, this is the next in line, and then have someone start working on them, maybe seed the money, fund them with grants or do whatever. That's how the ecosystem will get, because then in India, we will have a competitive ecosystem, because if we don't, let's take the case for batteries. We may be doing the system assembly of, and building good cars or EVs. But if one of the components, which is battery, and the second one being chips, if suddenly the producer those things decide that, they're going to create a disruption in supply chain by artificially hiking up the price, the competitiveness will go away. So that's really what I mean by we've got to create the ecosystem to make it competitive.
Interesting. Manish, coming to you. So there are two approaches of building or becoming a product nation, creating more product companies and increasing the local value add which government wants to focus on. So one is that you start building indigenous products to the complete full R&D, invest, but it's a long gestation project. Second way is that you start building TOD partnerships or do some M&As of some of the product companies probably outside. Which is the approach you would favor more, or what is your view on either of these two approaches? Where do these two approaches work better?
There'll be a bit of both, Nishchal, in this whole process. And you know what I believe, and we've done it at least 8-9 years in my own experience when I used to be on the other side of the table dealing with R&D. And R&D in the mid-90s to 2004-2005 in our country, for a lot of electronics which goes into appliances, durable space, was not meaning that you are designing products out of scratch. It meant that you are customizing the products for the Indian requirement, you are value engineering them to do away with frills if at all they exist, unnecessary cost of extra feature or extra quality or extra compliance. So you're customizing, your value engineering, and you are localizing the ecosystem, which essentially may mean that you're working on the bill of material to let that get produced in the country. And in this whole process, you're enabling tech transfers, training of the ecosystem, both for products and the manufacturing technologies and things like those. So I think it will be a bit of both. There would be sunrise sectors where we can leverage on our capabilities, our strength. Sanjay ji spoke about the fact that, Tejas, for example, over last 20-25 years have done some commendable work. We understand data, we understand connectivity, we understand software, we understand firmware, we understand how products should talk to each other. We understand that space very well. Can we look at leveraging on our understanding and looking at, because very near future is about things talking to each other. So far, I think things have communicated with people, but now things will also talk to each other. And in this whole process, a lot of comfort and convenience will get enabled for people. Energy efficiencies will get enabled. Safety and security for people will get enabled. And I think the logical outcome of this will be well-being for people. So I think in that space, we should look at building sensors, building products which talk to each other in the most frugal, most energy efficient manner. And then the ecosystem will start to evolve. So I think it'll be a bit of both. And we should definitely leverage, and I believe that multinational companies have a significant role to play in this whole ecosystem. One, they should look at putting India very firmly on their global hub and spoke model, both for supply chain and design and development. So far, I think India has been leveraged more from a service perspective, and of course, for some of the work which Indian engineers do for multinational corporations. But how can we look at building products for India from India? So I think multinational companies also have a significant role to play in this whole game.
So if I will just add to the thought process here. So I think there another way to look at TOTs and joint ventures is that mature technologies, which are now more manufacturing driven in terms of value creation, they are ripe candidates for us to do TOTs and joint ventures, because there's no point reinventing the wheel. So I think we should be very aggressive in wooing those kind of things which are in the mature areas of technologies. Emerging areas of technologies where the rate of innovation is very fast, nobody is going to give you your crown jewels. Even if the transfer of technology happens, it's only on paper, and all the crown jewels are kept behind, and only the the grunt work is given you. So I think mature technologies go after transfer of technologies. Secondly, as far as the innovation-driven stuff is concerned, there are two choices we have. We again don't need to start from zero. Number one choice is that I believe there are certain aging economies in the world, like Japan, Korea, and some of the European countries, where they've invested 20, 30 years of lot of very good work in creating technologies which have reached some stage of commercialization or are not yet in volumes. India provides a volume. So if we can partner with those countries, because we start with their base, have a lot of very bright people who can build on that base, and we can create a market which is Indian market and go global. So I think that's the second level in the innovation-driven thing. And then the third level in the innovation-driven thing is we have to take advantage of the Darwinian ecosystem that exists in the West. So if you really see any new sector, it happens, there will be 25 startups, The top 5 get funded well, they do extremely well, and they're great. The next 5 just about survive, and then after that, the long tail vanishes. Actually speaking, the technology differentiation between the number 1 and the number 10 is not that much. So I think we should have a very aggressive acquisition strategy by Indian corporates to go acquire those companies with whom you can jumpstart, knowing very well that they're 80 or 90 out of 100, but there is no reason with the talent and firepower that exists in India, we cannot make them 100 or 110.
Interesting. Yash, I'm going to ask you one question. So,
it was not a part of the script.
It's a surprise question. As a firm, we have internally debated many times that how should we look at some of the product companies. And as we discussed that building product companies requires patient capital. How should a growth equity investor like us should look at some of the electronics companies, or even in general any deep tech company, investing in a deep tech company, if there's any view you can share?
So, Nishal, I think, first of all, I think it's important to understand that what is the insight and how this ecosystem evolves. And, I think as a fund structure, where you have to return capital in a defined time frame, I think the approach that we are evolving toward, what is suited to us, is to have more a portfolio approach. So I'll give you a top-down answer and a bottom-up answer. So portfolio approach is, say there are companies of the likes of Tejas, or when we invested in Wari, I think it existed from 86. The biggest thing that they did till 2018 was to ensure that they survive. Because then when the ecosystem takes off, they're able to take off, right? So participate in some firms like this. In our energy basket, we have some companies. In electronics also, we have a company which is Elgin Electronics. So I think which are maybe 2.5 years away from an exit event. These are mature companies. The second basket is like classic growth equity, where they are in a certain cycle of this evolution. You participate at A point of time and you look at exiting at B point of time. And third, I think, which may be the most remunerative in terms of the absolute time spent and capital spent, is if you can do global partnerships and get some of these companies to India. So in the past, I think we have partnered with BYD twice. Similar to that ecosystem, the way the e-bus ecosystem evolved, it started with 10% margin addition or value addition. Now it is closer to 70% value addition. I think so. Those are plays that, so effectively your exit and your basket one effectively funds your basket three in that sense and allows you the breathing space to play that out. The one more interesting approach because of and I think maybe Manishji, you should add on it. Like if you take categories which are existing, but there is a one-time market displacement of that category which are happening because of policy shift. So let's say, for example, CCTV. Now, like maybe 50% of the CCTV market is dominated by Chinese companies. There is a you know the Bharat standards effectively ensures that you have to have a certain degree of localization in India. That gives an opportunity of effectively taking up that market shift, right? So if you participate in a company which may be 1/10 of the market share of the leader, but effectively because of this displacement can scale up quickly and has all the dynamics of scaling quickly, I think participating in those places. So you are effectively, and Manishji, if you want to add to that, you have seen scaled up players, you have seen young companies coming up. It would be interesting to get that perspective.
No, that's right, because while digital convergence might be in play for almost 25-30 years, but I think it is getting catalyzed now. So for two reasons, for sure, there is a point of entry. One is, as you rightly mentioned, like in the CCTV space, when the public procurement order came into existence 2.5 years ago, this was a huge point of entry for a lot of people. And you would see that point of time, significant shift in terms of market shares has already happened. And including the improvement of profitability, because you have much more better predictability in this whole space. The second change happened when the security guidelines came into existence, the SOC which is supposed to be used, the STQC guidelines which came into existence recently. Now this was again a huge point of entry for people who wanted like a better future to be driven for themselves. And third is that this whole value chain is also evolving. Initially from analog to IP, and now the cloud based, and shifts from public procurement being the dominant, demand generator. A lot is already happening, and there should be a time soon when the bylaws also are such that in order to safeguard the citizens, you should have situations such that a camera should be installed outside this building as a mandate. So I think this will continue to evolve, and specific to CCTV category, I would agree to you that these are the times when there would be an opportunity for people who would like to utilize any of these opportunities to have their own play in this ecosystem.
And the other approach, Nishil, that we have is to take a ecosystem view, which Sanjay ji was saying, that effectively how do you ensure it A and B part of the ecosystem benefit from each other, right? So for example, if we have let's say a defense EMS company, because defense electronics is one of the categories where growth rate is faster. Let's say you can argue that if the industry in defense electronics grows at 30%, a good company can grow at 40-45%. So if you have an EMS company, let's say if they are going to drive a certain part of the business to a PCB company, I think, can you enable more business to the PCB company via this EMS company? Can you, and we were talking about this before, can you go and do a relevant tech partnership with a geography of a company in Korea, in Japan, in certain geography, which can effectively jumpstart your time to market over there?
Manishji, so you have been in the industry for, close to 30 years or more than that.
Yeah.
And you have a very close eye view of how every category is evolving.
Sure.
Today we are discussing a lot about how to create and seed more product companies. So my question to you is, which are the categories or subcategories you see that we have reached at some maturity stage, and at least in the next 5 to 10 years time frame, we can actually start exporting these products to a lot of countries and can really create a global brand out of India.
Yeah, that would be a very tough one to respond specific to one category, because I think the state of maturity is not achieved in any category yet, because categories are also evolving. And as I said, so much of digitalization has started to happen into categories. For example, when I take a step back from where I started, essentially that era was called the era of through-hole PCBs. There used to be largely single-layered PCBs on which there used to be components inserted which used to go through hole, and soldering happens on the other side of the board. Today we have multi-layered PCBs, they're talking to each other fast, they're becoming more compact. So time continues to change. So I think what I would say is that yes, at the level of product, air conditioners is a great category. And as I said, we are aiming at 30-35% of the top line to come out of exports in the country in the time to come. I'm also very bullish of categories wherein the cost of logistics is not a disability as much. So air conditioners, for a different reason, we are getting there. But I believe that a lot into, for example, CCTV cameras we spoke, we should, with the rising economies of scale, with the growing ecosystem, not only of the cameras, but of the cloud capabilities, including the HDRs and the NVRs, which is gaining momentum in terms of scale, we should be very, very bullish to look at exporting. And third, what I've spoken in the recent past also, because the geopolitical shifts will also, not only the policy ecosystem of our country will continue to evolve for the betterment of making in India, designing in India, but the geopolitical change also will continue to happen. So I think we should also be smart in our analysis. While the models of the past which China adopted was largely exporting of what was made in China, we should look at a different model, which again would be a hub and spoke model of identifying, say, the free trade agreements in a specific region of a destination which again has free trade agreements with the neighboring countries. For example, Egypt happens to be one destination which is into FTA with many Eastern European and certain African countries also. Can we not look at setting up a small shop for the purpose which was done in the past in the country of assembling the goods, and India becomes the aggregator and also the manufacturer of components? So I think we should look at exploring newer models to be able to become competitive and leverage on the changing dynamics of the geopolitics and also the incentives and the FDAs as they exist elsewhere.
So, Manishji, one thing from an export standpoint is the size and scale of the setups that you're doing and the volumes that you're doing, and then do you have the integrated supply chain? Maybe I think in certain commodities we have had in the past. Do you think in certain categories of electronics we are there yet? Maybe I think not mainstream, but...
That's a great question, Yash. And we are trying to solve for that, and across industry associations, etc. I think we have invested last 2 to 3 years. So what is there at the very heart of everything is electronics. And within a lot, mechanical products like air conditioner is not an electronic product, but we are talking about it because almost 15 to 20% of the bill of material is electronics. Was not the case you go back 20 years ago. So was the case with the washing machine. So I think in everything there is a bit of electronics, and at the very center of electronics is certain components which ride on a board. Now, what are we trying to solve for our country? And I think this again would be a potential hockey stick situation which we will look at in the time to come. Now, the big question of the recent past is that why are we not manufacturing components in the country? And again, the argument has spread across from big ticket items like semiconductors to the discrete, to the passive, to the active, including the PCB boards itself. And while logically as the opportunity grows, there would be a viability for people to start to manufacture in the country, whether homegrown players or multinational companies who are already populating the boards with their components. So organically, anyway, the country's demand in few years will be such that everybody will do that. But how do we pull this up? Now imagine last 3 to 4 years, we have tried to solve for a problem that the question is that if the heart of everything is electronics and say a board on which a lot of components ride, are we populating these boards in the country? Are these components being imported, or these sub-assemblies are largely getting imported in the country? And you will be very surprised. This number for non-mobile applications exceeded $5.5 billion 2.5-3 years ago. And imagine if the import is coming such that you don't know which are those components which are riding on these boards. How will you aggregate the demand of those components? So first is, we as a country should ensure that population of large number of boards which are getting consumed into everything what gets manufactured in the country should happen in the country. So that has started to gain momentum, but we still are dealing with a similar number. Despite of consistent efforts, the number still stands at $5.5 billion of imports coming out of our country. Second is, while we should continue to remain focused on strategic components like semiconductors, we should simultaneously solve for the low-hanging fruits. So why a PCB should not get manufactured for large amount of applications? Of course, if the complex boards are there, it's a separate subject. If the scale is not such, it's a separate subject. But something which is cutting across majority of applications, in specific the consumer applications, manufacturing of those PCBs should happen in the country, which will open the door for laminates to happen in the near future. So these are the unlocks, and heat sinks, for example, which again ride on variety of PCB boards. So why should those? So for simplifying this for everyone, a PCB board is nothing but you are getting AC current into the PCB board. It brings it down to the level of electronics. So there is a power circuit, a SMPS circuit. So you have, say, transformers riding on a PCB boards. Why can't they happen in the country? Processors are semiconductors. Of course, we can leave it to the policy and the ecosystem as it evolves. Then you have wire harnesses. The country has been manufacturing wire harnesses for decades. So we should again look at, with the changing landscape of what is riding on these boards, manufacturing these wire harnesses in the country. And so is the case with the laminates and the boards.
So, Manishji, since we have been talking about PCBs, and I think would love to take both of your reflections on this. So quickly today, I think out of $115 billion, electronic components today in India is about $15 billion. Right? Let's say there is a 10% value addition. So it's a $1.5 billion revenue pool for Indian companies and another 10% margin. So roughly we earn some 1,500 crores of profit pool in electronic components in total together. Now, this number, let's say if we get to $45 billion or so, $450 billion or so, if we are at, the electronic components can be about 110 billion. So there's a growth, absolute growth rate of some 39-40%. And I think this profit pool can go from, like, say, 200 million to 1.7 billion. So it can 8 times.
Yeah.
Now, and if you look at segment wise, just I think PCB is broadly around 1/3 of this. So if your PCB market today is roughly, say, 0.6 billion, and if it can go to $10.5 billion or so. So if this is the ramp up which is there, I think its breakup is in mobile phones, consumer electronics, defense electronics,
everywhere.
IT hardware, everywhere.
Yeah.
What are the right set of PCB companies to invest in?
So, coming to the specifics of which are those companies to be invest, I think what should be the principle? And I believe that fundamentally there are multiple kind of, but fundamentally there are two kind of applications. One are the simpler applications, which largely cut across variety of products. For example, consumer appliances. Now, this industry from a potential $11-12 billion will continue to grow at a rate of 12 to 15% over next 5 to 10 years. And so would be the electronics growth within these categories. I spoke about air conditioners, washing machines, refrigerators, televisions, small kitchen appliances. So I think this is in principally one category. CCTV cameras, again, a lot of PCB cuts across. So how can we look at ensuring that this category of PCB is manufactured in the country? And then the second one is the complex applications which require multiple layers of boards, various designs as they exist. So economies of scale would not provide that stability for anybody to find it viable to manufacture in the country. So I think principally we should look at least solving for this mass where the economies of scale are starting to get built. Sanjay ji.
Yeah. Maybe I think just to take your question slightly at a one level higher. So in terms of the components that can be done in India, PCB is one category. PCB was, of course, is very capital intensive, and to get a certain kind of scale, you have to continue to invest. But it's a clear case that across the segments of anything in electronics, you'll need a PCB. Within PCB, there are complex and non-complex, which Manish talked about. In addition to PCB, if I were to again look at the passive components category, because semiconductors I'll also talk about in a minute, but passive components also, there are some other very large things because of the way the technology has changed are becoming more relevant. For example, he touched upon heat sinks. Now, as a lot more power gets generated, you need efficient ways to do this. And heat sinks is nothing but some kind of a molding or extrusion of aluminum or special materials. And we have enough of those capabilities in auto industry, for example. They can easily be applied here. But if you just aggregate the amount of heat sinks that India is importing is huge. Then you look at a third category of transformers. We make different kind of transformers, and he said every board will have some kind of transformers. Electromechanicals, which are these relays and things like that. I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which are relatively higher value addition in terms of not just domestic content but profit pool, as you call it, which can be done in India, which cut across all these sectors.
Let's say an ecosystem approach in evolved geographies. I think in China, the example of Suzhou, etc., it's like an integrated cluster, which is an integrated electronics cluster. How much does that as a difference create? And I think while the electronics industry in India has existed for 12 years, now there's a thought of creating an integrated electronics cluster. How will that look like? What benefits will it create?
This is something which industry, government, central and state should come together and do it. And while if you look at the recent past, I think in isolation, clusters have come up. And small and big efforts have been made. And Sri City, for example, a great example. I think there is a lot into air conditioners category which has started to happen, and the ecosystem is starting to get built over there. Now, the big question is that challenges which we are facing today, and I think I've spoken enough about disabilities as they exist, and we'll solve for them. But what I've learned from automotive industry and we replicated it into air conditioner industry is that if industry comes together to aggregate the demand and solve for capacity utilizations in the initial instances, I think a lot of disability can be done away with. So why electronics dedicated cluster is necessary? You can generate economies of scale for specific bill of material items. And while we live in a competitive democratic environment, but can we let the best player generate economies of scale for that ecosystem over there? Abiding by all the compliance and the regulatory and the standard requirements, and still continuing to keep the competitive rivalry in place. Can we look at aggregating the demand, say for heat exchangers with one player, say with molding with one player or more, say with sheet metal and tooling with one player, say with SMT machines? I mean, if somebody else can do 500 machines under one floor, why can't our country do? So I think this is the need of the hour. A vision wherein we can create a 4,000-5,000 acres of electronics dedicated cluster where we generate global champions is the need of the hour.
Sanjay, coming to you, semiconductors, which you were alluding to, is about 40% of this value share. How should one approach this? How should one tackle that?
So first of all, semiconductor is the heart of electronics. So everything else is kind of if you look at a car, but without the engine, the car doesn't move. So in that sense, semiconductor is probably the most important thing for us to skin the cat, if you were to say, right? So there are again three elements of semiconductors. One is the chip design, and which is where all the IPR and the knowledge gets. And the guys who are in the world who do that are NVIDIA, Broadcom, Qualcomm, AMD. These are all guys who do the chip design. They own 0 factories, they have nothing below, and they're the most profitable. They all generate 50 to 60% growth.
For a $10 chip, 60% margin.
60% gross margin. So typically, high-end chips, I'm not talking about NVIDIA, which probably says that 90% gross margin, but 50 to 60% gross margin is possible in the semiconductor business. If you sell for $100, the owner of the chip or the designer of the chips makes $50 to $60. Out of the 40 to 50 which is remaining, it gets split between multiple segments. So one of them is the semiconductor foundry, which is TSMC and like the foundries or fabs as we call it, which are being set up, that they'll make around 20-25% or 30% of that. And below that will be the ATMP or test manufacturing packaging, which will be another 15-20% and so on and so forth, right? So this is kind of and then another 5-10% goes into the distribution, by the distribution inventory. So there's a lot of money that goes into that as well. So if you really see, so these are the three buckets. So if you see as a country, where are we? So we have on our infrastructure and investment on the ground, we have made some progress on some semiconductor fabs. And again, we should qualify that there are different kinds of semiconductor fabs. So for example, the latest generation AI chips require 2 nanometer technology. which is available only with TSMC today. So even Samsung, which is number 2 in the world, can't do it. And forget about all the others who are way, way, way behind. And that's one. So we are, I would say, at the middle to low end of the semiconductor technology that are the kind of fabs which are coming to India. Below that, we have also done in terms of the OSAT, which is the test and packaging, which means after the chip has been produced and printed according to the specs that the chip guy has given, you break it into little pieces and put it onto plastic and, do the soldering. And that, I think, is kind of coming up. So I think OSAT will be doing all kind of chips. Semiconductor fabs will be doing some kind of chips. But the design, we could be doing any kind of chips. And if you look at the talent funnel in India, it's actually the reverse. We have the highest amount of talent in the world in terms of, other than US possibly, in terms of the chip designers. So if you take any chip in the world, I mean, there's a very good chance some part of that chip is already being designed in India already. I mean,
so what is required to mobilize them?
Exactly. So that part of the chip design process is what is called fabless semiconductor design, which is basically, think of it this way. You basically design the chip in a software. So there's no need to have anything in hardware. You describe it in some kind of a high-level language, how the chip works, how it should do, and then there are automatic tools which convert it into a printable form, which gets printed at a foundry like TSMC and so on. So I think the logic of what needs to be designed, the capabilities in India definitely exist, because we have about 50,000 to 1 lakh high-end chip designers who are working for NVIDIA, Intel, AMDs, Broadcom. You name any chip company, one of the brightest guys are working in India. So that talent is existing. Unfortunately, you never sell a chip by itself. You don't sell a chip to the consumer. You sell a chip to a product company, which is a systems company who will use your chip, whether it's a smartphone or a set-top box or a auto electronic systems or a camera, whatever. The chip has to be sold into a system. So now it's very logical. If chips are being designed in India, the creator of systems are sitting in US or China, for whom they already have some sources. What is the chance of an Indian chip company to succeed? So the answer is very obvious. We have to start with creating system companies in India. So we have to have product companies in India, which I mentioned earlier, who should start designing a product using whatever chip is available. And then they partner with a local chip company and say, you know what, if you do me a chip with this and this and this combined, it gives me a competitive advantage and I can be your anchor customer. And if you take that approach to the further approach that you mentioned, if you look at, we have suppose 5 CCTV camera guys in the country. All of them will need an image processing chip. And 1 or 2 companies design the best in class image processing chip with an agreement that if this chip comes with this price, this quality and this feature set, all of you guys design, and the government finds a way to mandate that because it's a security sensitive, whatever. Then suddenly you start to see a lot of money going to chip companies, a lot of capable chips getting developed. So what has been done on this thing is that as a part of one of the government reports, task force report, they identified 30 different categories of electronic products, which are across segments. 30. And within those 30, they identified 30 different chips, which are commonly used across many of these products. And then we said, you know what, let's focus on these 30 chips. And these 30 chips are, by the way, things which can easily be done. So things like controller. A controller will go into a washing machine, will go into a IoT, will go into a motor controller in an EV, will go into a controller in a BLDC fan. So why not do a controller? It's not a complex chip. And I'm not talking about doing a next generation of AI chip. I'm talking about a lot of other chips which can be easily done in a 24 months time period, for which there's a large consumer market like what Manish was saying. If you take all the chips consumed in India, and then the PCBs which are coming in a populated form, break it down to chips, and then we figure out what are the chips which are being used for manufacturing in India. And then you figure out what are the most important chips. So that is the kind of exercise which was done. So I think we have to develop those chips, but a chip without a product ecosystem is not going to work.
In 1960s, Taiwan started peaking in the electronics, in the assembly of value chain. It started giving a lot of subsidy. It set up very large electronic manufacturing clusters, made duty-free zones, and gradually its labor cost started rising. Towards around 1980s, its labor cost per hour in Taiwan was around $3, while in China it was around $0.3. It was like a 10x delta. And that's when a lot of Chinese companies started entering into China. That was the same time when Deng Xiaoping in China opened up Chinese economies, followed the same playbook which Taiwan had done.
Yeah.
India, from that perspective, seems to be at the same similar inflection point where currently our labor cost is $1, China is at $6 to $7, Taiwan is around at the similar time sort of range
Per hour.
per hour. India has been following the same playbook from the last 6-7 years. Indian government has been giving a lot of PLI. It opened up big wallet in the form of PLI subsidies. Last year they gave like 67,000 crore for the Indian Semiconductor mission. Very recently, 6 months back, they came up with the electronic components manufacturing scheme for 22,000 crores. So it seems to follow the same template. How do we become the product nation? And China progressed towards that. It started from EMS, progressed into ODM, and then a lot of OEM companies like Huawei emerged. How does it follow for India?
See, Nishal, I'll come to this, but suppose if I take a step back on where Sanjay ji left, if you try to understand what happens on the ground for people who are, say, wanting to get their own play, homegrown people, great talent. A lot of fabulous companies are growing in our country. But then when they walk into the big boys club, say to a foundry, to get their product taped out, they face tremendous difficulties. They don't find their space for getting their products manufactured, including at the cost which makes them competitive. Now, these are challenges on the ground, and why not? That is the case for any new company in the journey which it charters for itself. I think, again, responding to the point which you mentioned, and the reason I brought this argument into this one, and I read this book published by one of the major consultants, and they defined 3 terms which shape the future. And one of them, which is like the time which is going on, was called economic nationalism. जिसको हम आत्मनिर्भर भारत की बात करते हैं, vocal for local की बात करते हैं. You mentioned about Japan, you mentioned about Taiwan, you mentioned about China. This has cut across. Now in our country, and answering to your point you mentioned, there are cases exactly in the domain which Sanjay ji mentioned, some of that information of 1 or 2 fabulous companies developing products for some of the industries, including in the digital processing space, including image processing, specific to CCTV cameras. But we end up negotiating with one company or the other for a fraction of a cent. And one of the other companies is riding on economies of scale with decades of experience under their belt. And what will it take for them to subsidize it by a fraction of a cent? Will it make a huge difference, in terms of your product offering, and will consumer not prefer if the very proud logo of Make in India and designed in India is printed on that? So I think that is the difficulty. We have to really shift our mindset if we really want to enable a brighter future for innovators who have done it for the world to do it for our country. So,
Manish, that's very true. No, in mobile phones today is 43%. There will be 1-2 people who will be very large in this. Let's say 5 years out, mobile phone is still 23%. Our dependency will reduce, but tomorrow there's a policy somewhere changes in some country, and that manufacturer decides that they don't want to procure from India.
We have to stand up. Yes, very good point you again made. You go back 10 years ago, the local homegrown players in mobile phone were dominating. We used to be if I remember my memory serves right, we used to be 65-70% without naming any one of them, their friends. But the thing is that we were happy bringing in material from elsewhere and not even adding any amount of innovation. Forget about the product design. Can you not innovate your supply chain efficiencies? Can you not control your supply chain? Build a brand such that it's enough deep-rooted.
But Manish, unfortunately, even in home electronics today, that thought process of localizing the supply chain is there in a limited way. Or do you see that happening now? Have people learned from the past? Are people doing it?
It's changing quite rapidly. And you see that companies are starting to use both the systems and coupled with their experience to improve. Because, if you go back in the past, how would you make profitable business for yourself? Essentially, the previous mindset used to be that your gross margins will essentially determine. Then came a time that how do you have the ability to optimize your operating expenses? Now, these are the times where if you don't have the ability to do away with the hidden losses or the opportunity losses, there you need your full control on supply chain efficiencies, how well you are able to optimize the inventory management, how well you are able to not let opportunity losses happen and maintain that fine balance. And only a systematic approach can let that happen for you. And again, the cost of capital in our country still is higher comparative to any other country. So if you accumulate work in progress inventory, finished good inventory, the raw material inventory, which is not moving with the time, then you are having opportunity losses in this whole situation. So time is changing. I see that both the companies as they existed and the new age companies are adopting systems and processes to improve on those aspects.
Just to add one point, which is important in this context, you see, fundamentally, I think, by and large, even till now, even though we try to say that there's a lot of push for Indian products and all that, I think there's a lot of trading mindset still available where if I can get something which is already built in with very little risk, rebadge it, maybe put marketing dollars on top and sell it in India, it's a very risk-free investment and it's a sure short way. So really, versus the example that he gave that for a fraction of a cent, buying that chip and saying that it's really Indian, people may still hesitate because on one hand you got it from a global MNC, safe option, he has sold so many of this versus this. So I think as a country, collectively, there has to be some change of mindset, and not because of any individual business wanting to do, not because it's like the same situation. Everything that is happening in India, if you don't change that mindset, tomorrow there'll be a Kenya, there'll be a South Africa, there'll be a Brazil, which will take all our business away. Like 30 cents will, India's cost of living will go up, which it should go up, we want it. If you've not retained any value in the country, we are exposing ourselves. So it is in the self-interest of all those quote-unquote trading mindset people that we better change because it's going to hurt you, and we have seen it in front of our own eyes, right? So in my mind, that mindset has to change as a product thing that I may start off, but very quickly I want to say that I have enough intellectual property, enough value that is attributed to me rather than just being a pass-through with some change of labels.
Manish, I think just going to the next part in this, right, which is policy and partnerships.
Sure.
See, public policy is very important for this. Sanjay ji, you said that the government becomes an anchor customer. Also, I think the initial incentives to reach a certain critical mass and scale. I think in a lot of sectors, the government is giving relevant capex subsidies. Yeah. I think the regime is taking steps in that right direction, right? If there's a 1 lakh crore RDI fund, maybe it will mobilize at least 2 lakh crores of capital. I think from a policy standpoint, Manish ji, there are certain things which are already happening. What do you think, I think as the industry, one should benefit more from policy? What more can policy do?
Yeah, sure. So two things I would say. One, when you look back in time, you can always structure the past such that it happened in a methodical manner. But when I look at last 10 years, I think the case was such. Because specific to electronics industry, I think initially came the modified special incentives program, MSIPs. Then came the phased manufacturing program, which in a very structured manner changed the tariffs such that the domestic assembly became more beneficial for the OEMs. And then finally came a spec scheme for components and PLI for finished goods and components. So I think the approach of last 10 years on the supply side has been quite consistent. And then the much awaited GST reforms came. So in that sense, I think the potential unlock of the demand would be around the corner. So that is point number one. And of course, industry would consistently expect that can there be policy supports again to not let material of poor quality to come in from elsewhere. So I would be a supporter of more and more quality control orders to come into existence. Policies which will enable higher degree of data security to happen in the country. So I think those policies should consistently get mobilized, and these in turn will feed into a point of entry for a lot of companies within the country. So that is point number one. And second, I think while this will trigger generation of economies of scale to happen in our country, we should also become more bullish to look at exports to happen out of our country. And I think RODTEP may not be the solution because it will be limited to a certain number in almost all the categories where the intent is there. So we need to find out, again, as I said, a smarter way of becoming export competitive, which may not necessarily be limited to making products and exporting them as it is. Can we look at fitting in the global value chains in a smarter manner, where till the time we have competitiveness of cost and quality, we make ourselves mobilized to become more better in the exports which we do out of our country.
Sanjay bhai, your point of view on this, and specifically if we may cover the DLI part.
Yeah.
I think
So I
because we are
think,
talking on chips.
In terms of existing government policies, what else needs to be done? So if we have to creation of products, both at the semiconductor level, which is the fabless products for which the design-linked incentives are there, or the R&D innovation scheme, which will also promote the system level products to be created at the, for the, at least that, new sunrise sectors. So I think the R&D funding in my mind for product creation, which was missing at a large scale, is almost coming in place. And I think there's also interest from private investors to understand that this is a big opportunity area. And so that part in my mind is on right track, except that the implementation has to be friendly to the recipients. It is still a little bit cumbersome, but I think there's enough feedback and will get done. So in my mind, if I picture myself 5 years down, I can clearly see that there will be capable companies who will get funded at the right level, and they'll end up creating decent products. Where I think still work needs to be done is, assume the product is created, what next? How do we create a market pull or a market favorable situation, knowing very well that on day zero, any startup or any new product will have a handicap of economies of scale, like what you mentioned. There will be incumbent suppliers who will find technical and non-technical ways to bust, the entry of those guys. This is just common business. We haven't yet cracked that problem efficiently. Countries around the world, with the way the new geopolitics, we call the economic nationalism, it's a blatant case where if it's important for India to create its products, if you're already investing so much of country's money, resources, time in PLI and DLI and this scheme and that scheme, isn't it obvious that the outcome of all of this is also promoted so that finally when the product gets created, we scale it to this level and then go international. So I think this is one recipe which is missing. People have called it by a different name: demand aggregation, market pull, use of non-tariff barriers of the kind that you talked, and non-tariff or tariff, whichever barrier works or capable based on the different companies you have different trade relationship. I think all the tools available to the country have to be used to ensure that the products which are capable and get created in the country are scaled up.
So FTAs is a great example.
FTA, that's something. The tariff barrier, non-tariff barrier, FTA is a good way. So you get into a FTA with, for example, Israel has a FTA with US. Okay. So, and if you have a FTA with Israel and you partner with Israeli company, indirectly you kind of have access there. And there are many such things you described in case of Egypt and many on so. So I'm saying the tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, using the domestic market, which we have a large one, and aggregation of demand across states. So this is one aspect. The second aspect, which you should also do in parallel, and it's not a sequential activity like he also said. See, there's a lot of countries around the world, which are looking to create quote-unquote employment in new age industries. And I think different model has to be used. So we have been subjected to this quote-unquote model of transfer of technology, where some foreign company comes, sets up some manufacturing in India, really does some amount of transfer of technology. The crown jewels are held back, so you get your economic value add out. You leave some, bits and pieces on the table. But that bits and pieces was good enough for India for many years. Still continues to be in many sectors. I won't, go further than that. But there are many other countries with large population in Africa and in Latin America who are waiting for that. So why can't we set up a similar thing where we set up for example, a AC assembly unit, or two-wheeler electric assembly unit, or a CC camera or a telecom equipment assembly unit? And by the way, trust me, there are inbound inquiries for all of these for India, because for whatever it's worth, relatively in today's situation, India is a little bit more trusted than the guys on the East and West. So I think we have to take advantage of that, and India has to think that as a stated economic policy, it should promote its Indian companies with Indian products into geographies and use our bilateral lines of credit, trades and all that to promote this stuff. So I think internationalization is too crucial for us, because all these industries, the scale has to be global. So if you just rely on Indian market, that's not good enough.
So Yash, under the Strategic Autonomy Fund, what is the philosophy? How are we looking to add value to our investments? What is the sort of horizon we are looking at? If you can probably share some color, I think that would be super useful for the audience.
Thanks, Nishal. I think, at Singularity, things have built on one after the other. So we were very motivated by this problem statement, which has been the ethos of this discussion, right? That how do you build India a product nation? And I think you need that fundamentally to ensure that we provide good value-added jobs to the massive labor force, and we generate employment. Because see, I think as both of our esteemed guests mentioned, that any plant which is like $200-300 million plus of capital, if technology is coming from a geography where the cost of capital is higher, it will not generate a lot of employment, and you just don't want to do a gig work job. So I think the answer lies in how does India become a product economy. There's a playbook which people have committed their lives to, and we felt that that is our value add that we can provide to as a country as capital providers. So we structure a dedicated pool of capital in strategic autonomy. The thought process is to structurally add value in 3-4 ways. And I think what you guys imperatively had in your journey, right? Had there been investors like yourself who would have guided people in terms of what should be the strategy to address customers from day one, effectively think of starting exports, build technology capability where you're solving problem statements so that you're not dependent on a variable. So 4 things in terms of understanding techno-commercial aspects of things, ensuring that we do we solve for this product first, technology first approach, maybe initially by doing partnerships, and parallelly I think doing bottom-up innovation so that 3, 4, 5 years you can have the own overhang on technology and reduce dependency. And then I think ensuring that we enable offtakes. So if we can build all of this in a company plus capital with all of these insights, we hope that we can keep on structurally adding value and build assets which further the national agenda of strategic autonomy. So that is where the focus has been. And to that, I think, and maybe this as a conclusive question, let's say if you're rebuilding Tejas, you have 2 young sons, both of them are very bright post our interactions. So if you have to advise them that, okay, this is a category that start a company in, this is how it can look like, and this can be the playbook, what would you advise them?
So first of all, I think key thing to look at is look at sectors where there's some disruption happening in terms of technology disruption, supply chain disruption or something, because status quo will not give you good. Second, I think look at something that has a large anchor market in India, because to scale, you need to get to somewhere where you have an unfair advantage, and being in your own country, you do have that. And then, look at that same thing should have a global reach, because India alone is not a good thing. So if I put this litmus test against different sectors, a few things which stare out very clearly, especially given how the world is behaving. I think defense, aerospace, defense electronics, the whole area is definitely going to require that a lot of muscle gets built in India. So starting with product companies, EMS companies, component companies, and the whole 9 yards of the thing will, I think, need to get built. Software on top of all of that. So I think that's clearly one area. Telecommunication, I think, is again going to become a very key player, because first of all, everything needs to be connected. We have connection of human beings, there will be connection of networks, everything will be there. Every strategic requirement requires communication with AI and data centers. They need connectivity. So I think that's another thing. 6G is coming. That's another. So I think that's another area where there's a good head start in India, and we can make. And semiconductors as something that we are good at in India but haven't done. So to me, it's like a unclaimed opportunity, especially on the fabless semiconductor side. I think there's tremendous talent. What is missing in all of these things, I feel, is that the raw R&D talent is there. We need a little bit more product marketing fit kind of people who would curate a lot of these ideas, from good ideas to investable ideas to good business ideas, and help them through that journey. So I think that is kind of the missing part, and that is really where a little bit more ecosystem needs to get built within India. And I think one of the things which is also being targeted is that there are a lot of Indians outside of India who want to come back and who have already done this multiple times over. So those coming back and contributing to this pool, I think would really be very, very interesting to create. But these would be the industries that look like ripe for the next stage of growth.
So you said medical devices.
I said defense, communication, and of course medical devices also come into the same thing. Lot of electronics goes, lot of software goes. The way things were done 10 years back, 15 years back, and the way things should happen for next 5-10 years with memories, processing, AI. I think health is a very good sector to get disrupted. By the way, just to get you a sense, advanced economies spend 15 to 20% of their country's GDP on health. India spends 2%. So if we can say if it takes 2% to 5%, but use technology as an invention, we can get better outcomes than the 20% GDP. So look at the societal impact. And anything which has this scale, this size, this technology impact, I think is ripe for innovation. So in my mind, that's a third sector that I would definitely pick as well.
Manishji, I think you understand scale up brilliantly. If you have to pick up companies which are maybe 10-20,000 crore revenue and can potentially become 10 times of that size, which are the 2-3 sectors that you will pick up?
So now I'll give you a fundamental idea, Yash. I think very much similar to what Sanjay ji mentioned. If you imagine like why things happen, they happen because every company works in making life of people better, essentially. So there can be multiple facets for that, but I think the 3 things which I'd like to pick up in terms of the delivery would be, first would be like things which will provide comfort and convenience to people. Second is things which will enable higher degree of sustainability, energy efficiencies in people's lives into enterprise spaces. And third is the well-being, So which essentially may translate to, and if you start to imagine that how people live their lives, they live in 2 spaces, they work in 2 spaces, and they mobilize themselves. And again, in this framework, if I have to pick up 3, there are multiple opportunities. I think in our country, there are many. We can go on and on. But I think if I have to pick up top 3, I would say the ecosystem wherein we can build energy efficiencies, because energy is generated, energy is stored, energy is managed, energy is distributed and transmitted. But I think there is so much of opportunity to manage it such that efficiencies are built into this situation. So I think people are already trying to improve that. How can we store it at the time when it is generated through sunlight and utilize it optimally? Smart meters are becoming smarter. The differential tariffs are starting to play a role. But these are just some tactical initiatives. There is so much which can be done in the whole ecosystem of energy. So I think that is one domain which we can look at. The other one, for example, I spoke about comfort and conveniences. Imagine spaces where you live. Products have just started to talk to each other. A speaker is listening to you. It is instructing one of the device in your home. Robots will start to come in. Sensors which will check your motion while you're sleeping, how much of discomfort you're feeling, and adjust the cooling accordingly, and so on and so forth. So I think within the comfort and convenience space, sensors, communication devices, and of course, this will feed into data centers and stuff. So I think that would be the second area which can be looked at strategically. And third, as I said, well-being. If we can look at democratizing, say, medical services, medical devices in a country where a lot are still deprived. So I think that would be the third one which I would look at.
So Manishji, Sanjayji, it has been an absolute pleasure and privilege, I think both for Nishal and myself. Thank you so much for sparing so much time. And we hope that I think your inspiration of making India a product economy, we continue doing a job of worthwhile relevance over there.
Yeah, likewise, Yash, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I must once again compliment Singularity for the wonderful work you guys are doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yash. And again, great job and a very good focus, because you're doing something which, isn't looking at things in the same way that many others are. So I think it's a great opportunity. So good job again. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for the encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you.